And we continue with Professor Allan Puur from the University of Tallinn. His research interests relate to contemporary demographic development in Estonia and comparative population studies. He is also actively engaged in developing research infrastructure for demographic research and international networking. And his talk is on Can Small Disciplines Make a Contribution? Some insights into the demography in Estonia. Please go ahead.
So, good afternoon. Also on my behalf, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm representing Tallinn University. My presentation is about the question whether small disciplines can contribute to science, and this is actually not a fully rhetoric question, and also it's not an innocent question, because it can appear in really serious situations. For instance, last week we had an evaluation of our doctoral program, and then we were asked by reviewers different questions, and the only thing that puzzled them that was the smallness of our discipline. And this is not only about Estonia, but also internationally. Demography is a rather small field. I have here today slides on mostly from fertility, which is one of the most fundamental demographic process, one of the three most fundamental demographic processes, and it ensures renewal of the population. And as you all know, in Europe, fertility is below replacement, practically in all countries, and it has been there for several decades. And now the question is, how can society be sustainable in such a condition? This slide presents the story for Estonia, and you can see that we have had quite an abrupt decrease of fertility rate in the 1990s. It fell almost twofold. There has been some recovery in the 21st century, but it is still the deficit from replacement level, which means that the generations of children are the same size as the generations of parents. The deficit is almost a quarter. So this type of pictures actually feed to the rhetorics of demographic crisis, which means the question whether our societies are sustainable. This picture is correct, but there are several things which are actually hidden there. And one very important thing is a huge change in the age pattern of childbearing, which has occurred over the past 30 years in Estonia. In the 70s and 80s, which you see there, this higher part of the graph, women had children usually in their 20s. 80% of children were born before age 30. But nowadays, this has dramatically changed, and today we have more than half of children born after the 30th birthday. And it has huge implications on fertility rate, as we see it as statistical offices report it annually. And in order to get a more realistic account of the fertility and demographic situation in general, we should transform this picture and look not only in period-wise on these data, but we should transform it into cohort data and look how these different generations of women have experienced childbearing. And this is the graph that presents this alternative view. And basically there are two findings to pay attention to. First is that you see that all these graphs which represent successive generations are moving to the right. And this movement means postponement of childbearing. But what we expect to see. But what is perhaps more important and more interesting is the final level, how many children women will have at the end of their reproductive career in different generations. And as you see, our oldest cohort in this graph, the 1960 cohort, had more than 1.9 children per woman. And it's not surprising that the following cohorts will have less children. But what is perhaps different and even strikingly different from the previous slide is the scale of decline. You see that in the generations born in the 70s, actually the fall, the decline of in the number of children has been only 0.1, which is a very, very big contrast to what we see on our period measures. And this is really something that we should pay attention when evaluating the demographic situation. Now, it also affects the ranking of countries in, when they are compared internationally. In this graph, I have put about 30 European countries, and you can see that Estonia can be found in the upper third, actually, despite that we are really seriously concerned about our low fertility level. And when we focus on native Estonians, then Estonia is situated actually among the 6 countries with the highest levels of fertility. So what I'm trying to say that different perspectives on the data, on the social data, are extremely important for making the right interpretation of the situation which we are having in society. Now, the question may arise, what is behind this? Why Estonia ranks so high if we look at our cohort indicators? And usually colleagues who are doing this types of analysis, the slides have stopped. The colleagues who are looking for explanations okay, there is something very wrong with the slides. Colleagues are pointing to family policies, and Estonia has really really a strong package of family policies. And the main elements of this package are on this slide. There are different measures that can reduce the costs of childbearing, and in international comparisons, Estonia is doing quite well with this. Now, the question is for society, if we want to improve the situation further, what should be the next steps in policy development in the demographic domain, especially in fertility? And this spring we had a working group commissioned or tasked by the committee at the parliament to discuss these issues, and there were quite strong interest groups which advocated for putting the main emphasis to third and higher order children in Estonia. And to see whether this approach is valid or not, we made an estimation of the number of children in different generations by order of birth. So this slide shows the third and higher order birth, and what you see is perhaps surprising, because since the end of the Soviet period, we don't see here any decline in the probability or number of third and higher order births. But what we see where the changes are is the birth of the first child. So we are witnessing here quite a substantial increase in the level of childlessness, and this is probably the area where the policies should be targeted in the next decade or so. And I'm also showing this last slide, we showed it also to policymakers. This slide shows that Estonia has actually quite good position to implement these policy changes and to strengthen population policies, because we are really, in the European context, underperforming right now with regard to the level of social expenditures. And I think if we talk about the advisory role of the academy and academia in a broader sense, then in Estonia this is probably one area where this advice should be given, that we should invest more in social area, and these social expenditures are not really expenditures but more like social investments. Thank you.
Thanks.